Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Good morning, Atlanta. Good morning. It's so good to be here. Thank you all for making the time. And thanks, John, for that introduction. Today, I want to take you into the future of transportation. The future is now, not in 15, 20 years. But before I do that, I want to take you into the past. New York City, 1900. In a sea of horses. We used horses as our main means of transportation for thousands of years. And this is New York City, 1900. Can anyone see the one car in that picture? The one car, I usually would say I would offer a book there. There is one car in the Easter Parade, New York City, 1900. 13 years later, can anyone see the one horse in that picture? Anyone? There. It's in the same place for the oddball, I assume. If anyone had stood on stage in 1900 saying that this thing called the internal combustion engine automobile was going to disrupt horses, they would have called her or him insane. And yet, it did happen in 13 years. That's a technology disruption. When disruptions converge, they happen very quickly. So what is a disruption? It's essentially when new technologies make it possible for companies and entrepreneurs to do two things. I mean, create new products that open up new markets and also either destroy or radically transform existing ones. That's what a technology disruption is, and that's my work, and it's been my work for at least the last dozen years. And take you to 1985, just to show you that it's not the smartest people who can understand disruption. In 85, the then largest telecom company in the world, AT&T, hired consulting company McKinsey, and they asked them one question. This thing called the cell phone, what's going to be the market in 15 years? So McKinsey went off and did whatever it is that they do, and they came back with the number, 900,000. The actual number was 109 million. This is not a small mistake, right? It's a factor of 120x. AT&T got disrupted, of course, the landline telephony, but by not entering the market, the cell phone market in time, they missed out on some of the largest wealth creation opportunities in the 21st century. So if you look at just 7 companies that did take advantage of that, that's a market valuation of more than $3 trillion, just 7 companies. And that's what you miss out. And it's usually the experts and the insiders, and even some futurists who don't get it. They always dismiss opportunities. No, it can't happen this quickly. No, users love horses, right? How could it happen this quickly? And so, that's the cover of Forbes magazine in November 2007. What else happened in 2007? Yes, the iPhone, right? And Android. So 2000, another example. I can take you through all kinds of examples. Need I say more about Kodak? But this is what I'm going to say about Kodak. 2000 was a record year in revenues, in profits, in numbers. So if you're the CEO of Kodak, how do you feel? You feel great. Everything is looking up, everything up and to the right. And boom, I should have where's the digital camera here, right? Except Kodak invented digital cameras. Kodak invented digital imaging. They knew how fast it was coming. And yet, they could not bear themselves to disrupt their own business. So this is what I wake up asking myself. Why do smart people in smart organizations consistently fail to see or lead market disruptions? And so over the last dozen years, I've been working to create a framework to not just understand disruption, but also anticipate disruption. I'll walk you a little bit through some of the elements. One is the cost curve of technologies. There's a number of technologies, all of which are improving at different rates. All of Silicon Valley has been built on Moore's Law, which says that the cost of computing improves by about 40% for the same dollar every year, which means every 20 years it's 1,000 improvement, every 40 years it's 1,000,000 times improvement. But a number of technologies, data storage, digital imaging, batteries, and so on, are all improving at different rates. So you need to figure out what the rates of each one is, because my research has found that what enables the big disruptions is convergence. We talk about disruptive technologies, and yes, there's such a thing, but convergence is what enables the big disruption. What does that mean? So ask yourself, why did both Google and Apple come up with a smartphone 2007? Why not 2005? Why not 2009? Why not? That's because the technologies that made a $600 smartphone possible converged in 2007. So that year, anybody, Nokia could have done it. BlackBerry, remember them? Could have done it. Motorola could have done it. And it turns out that this is another rule of disruption. Disruptions usually happen from the outside. Neither Google nor Apple had ever built a phone before, ever. And they were the ones who disrupted the market and now own 90+% of that market. Now, what are the key technologies that I'm following that I see that when they converge, they're going to essentially disrupt every single industry in the world? I mean, the 2020s are going to be the most disruptive decade in history, when different technologies essentially converge at different points in different markets. And so this is not all the technologies, but this is what I follow. One more point, which is really, really important. Technologies S-curve, the concept of S-curves. When you see experts and mainstream analysts and so on talk about the future, usually it's linear. Usually they show you a line. But in fact, every single technology in history, or at least the history that I've studied since 1454, gets adopted as an S-curve. Successful technologies. Unsuccessful can die quickly, and that's a good thing, so entrepreneurs can move on to the next thing. But successful technologies get adopted as S-curves. And it may take a long time to get to that tipping point, but when it tips, it happens very quickly. It's super exponential, weeks, months, a few years, and then it's over. After 80%, it's pretty much over. Did I say every single technology in history? S-curve. And so back to the horse in the car, I did some studying of all of America, not just New York City, and here's what I found. The disruption took about 20 years, from about 1905 to get to 95% of the market in all of America. 20 years, which is not that long. Interestingly, the first gas station in the United States was opened when? Does anyone know? 1905, the first gasoline station. Is that insane or what? But here's the most interesting thing. From the tipping point, from about 11% to about 81%, it only took 10 years. So the disruption, the S-curve, actually happened in 10 years. And that's not, this is more than 100 years ago. And that's not what I find the most interesting. Here's what I find the most interesting. It took 10 years while we built a brand new industry, oil, a brand new industry, auto. Basically, we built those two industries at the same time. We built a brand new transportation system, and we fought a war. Remember World War I? All of that happened, and the disruption still took 10 years. So anyone who tells you disruption in transport cannot happen in 10 years is not looking at the data. And S-curves are accelerating. I mean, if you look at, S-curves from the beginning of the 1900s to now, look at how steep they are now. Now they look like J-curves. I mean, basically things live or die in a matter of weeks or a few years, and then you're gone. If you're not there when it tips, you're gone, essentially. And yet, we still see the mainstream analysts give us lines. I mean, solar PV, for instance, has been growing at about 40% per year since 2000, right? And each year, the International Energy Agency says, oh, here's a line of adoption until 2040. And then it grows 40%, and then the IEA goes back and says, oh, it grew 40%, let me push up the line. Another 40%, okay, I'll push up the line. I mean, at which point do they get that this is an exponentially growing market, right? One very important thing is that business model innovation is every bit as disruptive, if not more, than technology innovation. And if you look at Uber, for instance, ride-hailing, Uber, Lyft, and so on, they're a business model innovation. Essentially, they're a marketplace broker. Basically, they took advantage of two things, the smartphone and the cloud, to create that model to disintermediate the taxi industry. And again, San Francisco today, 20% of vehicle miles traveled, 20% are Uber and Lyft. From zero in 2009, from zero. In New York City, trips within New York City, ride-hailing is half of trips of individually owned cars. Half, 50%. Again, anyone who tells you disruption can't happen this quickly is not looking at the evidence. But wait, there's more. Last year, we love cars, right? But last year, 10% of Americans who traded in their cars did not buy a new one. 10%, that's not a small number. They started using Uber and Lyft. This is huge, 10%. I mean, to me, I look at these numbers and I'm like, oh, how do you go from 10% to 100, right? So business model innovation is every bit as disruptive as technology innovation. So a few years ago, I took this model and I wrote a book called Clean Disruption, 4 years ago, to be sure, of energy and transportation, where essentially the numbers, all of these things that I just talked about, said that by 2030, it'll be over. I mean, basically all of energy and transport, as we know it, is going to be disrupted, and it's going to be over by 2030. And of course, at the time, it sounded insane, and it may still do, but I'll walk you through it. So batteries are essentially, when I published my book and 4 years ago, they were improving at 14% per year over 15 years. 14% per year. So, and over the 4 years, from 2010 to 2014, essentially 2 new industries came into the space, and it accelerated to 16%. So, cost curves may accelerate, actually. So I took that 16%, and I did a cost curve. Let's assume that it keeps improving at 16%. You can see what industries can be disrupted. So people tell you, oh, there's a magic number that we need to reach, 100 or whatever. That's not true. At different points, it can converge and disrupt different industries, different segments. So, different peakers are already being disrupted. A base load is going to be disrupted soon, and so on and so forth. And investments in batteries just are going insane. I mean, from 2014 to 2017, the capacity that's being built for 2021 went up by 6.5 times in 3 years, and it's still going up like crazy by 6.5 times. And as a result of that, the cost curve has accelerated to 20%. So 4 years ago, mainstream analysts told me, it can't possibly keep going down at 16%. Well, they were right. It's going down at 20% because of all this build out. And even companies like Dyson are in the business now. They acquired the company and they said that they're going to build an electric car. Dyson. I mean, isn't making cars difficult? I mean, don't you need like precision manufacturing and this and that and the other? Well, no, I mean, let me talk about EVs later, but Dyson, talk about a clean disruption, right? Yeah, couldn't resist, sorry. Let me talk about EVs. So are EVs disruptive? Or is it a greeny, commie conspiracy to, get rid of oil and whatever? So let me walk you through why EVs are disruptive. One, when you buy the EV, it's about 10 times cheaper to charge on a per mile basis, 10 times. So you have 80, 90% savings in energy if you have an EV, 10 times. Usually 10x means disruption. Parts, this is your car. Basically, ICE cars have 2,000 moving parts. 2,000 moving parts. Maintenance costs, that's why they're so huge. EVs have 20 moving parts. Should I say that again? 20 moving parts. It's 1%, and many of them don't even touch one another. They're electromagnetic. That's why maintenance is essentially, almost free, which means that EVs last at least 500,000 miles for cars. We know that cars are being built for 1 million miles, and trucks are being built for multiple million miles. But of course, why would 500,000 miles be disruptive? I mean, we only drive 10,000 miles a year. I mean, who drives a car for 50 years, right? Unless you live in Cuba, of course. But if you're a fleet, you do drive your car, Uber or Lyft and so on, for 100,000 miles per year. It gets interesting because over 5 years, 500,000 miles, you would need 1 EV or 2.5 ICE vehicles. So if you're a fleet, at some point, you have to go EV because it's the rational economic choice. Talk about range anxiety, right? You need 1 EV or 2.5 ICE vehicles. And EVs are way more powerful than ICE vehicles. I mean, even a student team has built an EV that is more powerful than the $1 million Porsche 918 Spyder. If any one of you has a Porsche 918 Spyder, you know what to do with it. I mean, a bunch of kids beat Porsche, right? And of course, an EV, a car, can actually power your house. We have that technology. And a 200-mile EV can charge the average American home for 2 days. 2 days. Try that with your VW diesel, right? And so when you have this vehicle-to-grid technology, you can essentially make money by being connected to the grid, by providing grid services. I mean, imagine taking a truck or a van, plugging it into the grid, and making money providing grid services. We have the technology. So now, what is the cost curve of EVs? 4 years ago, I published this, and I said, by this time, I could predict I would be here, by the way. By this time, basically in 2018, the market would offer EVs with 200-mile range in the $35,000 to $40,000 base price in 4 years. And what was I called? Insane, of course, right? So where are we? We have 2. We already have 2. So the cost curve of EVs is going that way. And if you've been to China, you know that this is going to accelerate. And I'm going to be there this weekend. China has more than 300 EV companies. 300. We have 1, right? What's going on there is just insane. 300 battery companies, 300 EV companies. The cost curve is just being accelerated. But what this also says is that by 2025, so by 2020, the industry will make electric vehicles that are 20% cheaper than the median new car in America, and also 10 times cheaper to fuel, more powerful, 10 times cheaper to maintain. What do you think people are going to buy? And cost curve is going to keep going down. What this cost curve says, and remember, it's 16%, it's already accelerated to 20, is that by 2025, every new vehicle will be electric. By 2025, not 2040, by 2025, because of purely economic reasons. And as disruptive as that can be, autonomous vehicles are an even bigger disruption. Let me show you this. Anyone from Phoenix? So this is Google, the company Waymo, the company that Google basically has set up to do autonomous vehicles. They already have a fleet of level 4 autonomous vehicles in Phoenix already. Level 4 means no hands, I mean, essentially you don't, the steering wheel is just for show. You can't do anything with it. Basically they're going around level 4, no humans needed. Today, I mean, that's happening already in Phoenix, and Waymo says that by the end of this year, 2018, they're going to blanket Phoenix with autonomous on-demand vehicles, level 4 autonomous vehicles. Now, more than 50 companies, I mean, this is old already, 50 companies, 60 companies are investing tens of billions of dollars every year in autonomous technology. Huge amounts of money. Why? Because if you look at the history, I mean, AVs are, autonomous vehicles are computers on wheels. So essentially, if you look at the history of computing, you learn two things, right? Many things, but two things. One, all you need is one operating system to work, and we're off to the races. So Apple did not wait for Google to release the iPhone, right? Apple did not wait for Microsoft to release the Apple II. All you need is one, and we're off to the races. And, you know, like a spouse, all you need is one. And in the end, only two operating systems are going to survive, maybe a third. So if you look at iOS and Android, if you look at Mac and Windows, only two take most of the market. So it's a winner-take-all market. That's why folks are like racing, no pun intended, to get into this industry. Now, what about the cost? I'll give you an idea of two technologies. One, this is what LiDAR sensor. It's an essential sensor to achieve level 4 or level 5 autonomy. And LiDAR was 70 grand just 6 years ago. And of course, at the time, you know, what did experts say? Not gonna happen. It's twice the cost of the car. What did happen is this. There's a company in Silicon Valley called Quanergy that's already selling a $1,000 LiDAR. 1,000. It's gone from 70 to 1 in about 5 years. Not bad, right? But wait, there's more. That same company is now making the $250 LiDAR. The size smaller than your iPhone, $250. Now, it's not this big thing that says, hit me, right? It's, you know, too little. And when you put it in a car, this is the Fisker 2020 autonomous electric vehicle. Do you see where the LiDARs are? It has 5. It's so small you can embed it in the car. So what about the cost curve of computing? You need a supercomputer to process all of these millions of bytes of signal per second and so on. So just to give you an idea, this is the world's largest supercomputer in the year 2000. 1 teraflops, $50 million. 1 teraflops, $50 million. This is last year's NVIDIA GPU, 8 teraflops, $600. Okay, I'll repeat. From 1 teraflops, 50 million, to 8 teraflops, $600. So that's an improvement of 600,000 times. And the next gen, the one you need for level 5, is 40 times more powerful. And that's coming out this year. So, and according to NVIDIA, there are 25 companies that are building level 5. Not just 4, but 5 autonomous technology. And like any operating system, if it works in a car, it's going to work, basically it's portable. It's going to work in a three-wheeler, it's going to work in a truck, it's going to work in a van. You just take it and put it in another vehicle. There's a wheelchair. I mean, that's me in Singapore at an MIT lab in a wheelchair, autonomous wheelchair. Check that out. And it's not just substituting existing modes, by the way. There are delivery units that are electric and self-driving delivery. I mean, think about how logistics is going to be changed when you have delivery units basically self-driving. So how does that change your decision on where to put warehouses and so on and so forth? Okay, so it's very cool. Autonomous technology is very cool, but what is the disruption? Here's the disruption. But before I say that, the car is the middle class's second largest capital expenditure, but we only use it 4% of the time. We park it 96% of the time. That's a waste of everything. That's a waste of money, that's a waste of land. So the disruption is called transport as a service. And it's the convergence. Remember the convergence that made the smartphone possible? It's the convergence of autonomous, electric, and on-demand transportation. Autonomous, electric, and on-demand. When autonomous vehicles are approved and ready, let's assume it's 2021, autonomous vehicles like the one I showed, the Google ones, essentially fleets can drive Uber, Lyft, and so on 100,000 miles a year. They're going to have to go electric for purely economic reasons. When you do the numbers, 5-year basis, 500,000 miles, you add everything up, it'll cost 2.5 times less for an EV, so they're going to have to go EV or go bankrupt. And so, and they're already going that way. Waymo already put an order for 20,000 EVs. 20,000 just now. And in China, Didi says that they're going to have 1 million EVs in their network in 2 years. 1 million EVs. And this is not 1 million buyers. This is one company, 1 million EVs. And just to give you an idea of how many miles this means, this is the equivalent of a third of all the passenger miles in California, half of all the passenger miles in Canada, just 1 million fleet EVs. So again, transport as a service is on-demand, autonomous and electric, owned by fleets, not individuals, owned by fleets. And so what happens in 2021 or whenever level 4 autonomous vehicles are ready and approved, that day, the cost per mile of transportation goes down by 10x. So imagine Uber electric autonomous. The cost per mile goes down by 10x. 10x has always caused a disruption in history. Every single time in history, when an equivalent product or service is available for 10 times cheaper, or at least since 1454, 10x has always caused a disruption, every single time. So 2021, folks are going to have to make this decision when they go buy a car. Do I want to spend $50,000 all in over the next 5 years to own a car? Or do I want to buy a $100 a month subscription to Uber or Lyft or whatever? No-brainer. People are going to stop buying cars. And when you run all these numbers, 95% of passenger miles by 2030 will be electric, autonomous, electric, and on-demand. 95%. Now, this doesn't mean 95% of cars will be AEV. 60% are going to be fleet that drive 100,000 miles, and 40% are going to be individually owned that drive 10,000 miles, but they only contribute 5%. The implications are astonishing if you think about it. The size of the fleet in the US will shrink by about 80% because cars are going to be driving around instead of being parked 96% of the time. So we need, and by the way, rush hour, we only use 8% of the cars in rush hour. This is basically 20% of the existing fleet. So it gives ample room for rush hour. Annual demand for new vehicles, individually owned, goes down by 70%, starting at the point of disruption, at the tipping point. Implications for oil. Oil demand peaks 2020 and goes down by 30% till 2030. But this isn't the bigger one. I mean, it looks pretty smooth. Cost, price goes down immediately, because we've learned that all you need in the oil markets is 2 million barrel oversupply for prices to come down from 100 to 20. So the equilibrium price is going to be $25. And I'm talking about 2021 or 2. I mean, this is exactly a year or 2 after AEVs are approved. And a bunch of the oil that we already have invested trillions of dollars in that cannot compete at 20 or 25, gone, stranded immediately. Big implications, more implications. The average American family saves $6,000 a year by not owning a car and instead using Taas. That means $1 trillion addition to the US economy. Social, increased mobility for all. I mean, transport's going to be so cheap, door to door, 10 cents a mile, that anybody can afford 10 cents a mile. I mean, that means that, you know, a store in a mall here can pay for customers within a 10-mile radius to bring them for $1. For $1. I mean, instead of having 30% off, you say, look, I'll bring you here for free. So everyone will have access to cheap, convenient transportation for the first time in history. And traffic accidents will go down by 1 million a year, and all kinds of implications for the environment. The other one that's also interesting is that since you can plug your car into the grid, you'll be able to. Essentially, we're going to have 1.2 terawatt hours. That's about 1 hour of storage for the whole US electricity infrastructure on wheels. So essentially, these cars will be able to plug into the grid and make money providing grid services. How cool is that? And every 4 years, and of course, parking is going to be obsolete. Why do you need parking, especially in the central business district in downtown, which is very expensive, when you have cars going around all the time and nobody's going to own one? So the city landscape is going to be redesigned. American cities are about 30–40% parking. Fort Worth is 40% parking. The landmass of Fort Worth is 40% parking. So essentially 80% of that gone. I mean, so the decisions that cities are going to have to make, LA, for instance, I did the numbers, and you'll be able to fit 3 cities the size of San Francisco, with parking and all, in the vacant parking space left in LA. 3 San Franciscos. So LA is going to be totally redesigned, and so they need to decide, what do we want to be when we grow up, right? And of course, how does that change everything? How does that change transportation? How does that change logistics and retail and so on and so forth? So for the first time in a century, American cities, since the horse and the car, are going to be totally redesigned. Parking is going to be obsolete, so we're going to be able to put, you know, housing, yes. Businesses, yes. Warehouses, yes. Green parks, yes, because there's going to be so much land available. And, you know, and I could be here for hours talking about other convergence. So when drones converge with autonomous vehicles, what's going to happen? They're already working on it. Imagine autonomous vehicles with a couple of dozen drones basically delivering packages, right? That's not in the future. I mean, some companies in Australia, New Zealand, and so on are already delivering using drones. But think about that convergence and how drones change warehouse management, because they can fly in and check everything inside. And those technologies are being developed as we speak, and it's not that far away. So let me take you back to the future, starting with the horse. But we're here. We're essentially driving, we're all essentially driving typewriters on wheels. And if you don't know what a typewriter is, I have made my point, right? I've made my point. I mean, Individuals may keep one in the basement, but a business cannot have half its employees on typewriters and the other half on computers. Once you're in, you have to go all in for purely economic and competitive reasons. So we're on the cusp of the biggest, largest, most consequential disruption of energy and transportation in history ever. This is a $10 trillion a year disruption. That's going to change essentially energy and transport are the core of every economy, of our urban landscape, of essentially everything we do. And all of that's going to change. Cities are going to change. Warehousing is going to change. Logistics is going to change dramatically and quickly. So we're here. We're driving essentially typewriters on wheels. And by 2021 or so, that's the tipping point. And after the tipping point, if you're not there, you're out. You're totally out. And that's what the numbers say. And even if autonomous vehicles are not ready by 2021, I showed you that at least one company has it out there already. Essentially, once it happens, plus or minus 2 years, it could be sooner, it's going to be steeper. The S-curve is going to be steeper because we're going to have a larger infrastructure of EVs and batteries and so on and so forth. And it's pretty much going to be over by 2030. Over. For internal combustion engine automobile, for the existing modes of transportation, for coal, gas, nukes, oil, and so on and so forth. And I'll leave you with this thought. This is not a transition, as the experts would have you believe. This is not an energy transition. This is a technology disruption. And when technology adoption tips, it tips very quickly. This is a technology disruption. Thank you. Thank you.